An 81-year-old veteran walked into court wearing his bronze star and got fined for it. But what the judge didn't know, he was about to get schooled by a legal mind sharper than anyone in the room. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. The courthouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma, built in 1927, had seen its fair share of drama. But on that Thursday morning, no one expected the spark to come from a man in a neatly pressed grey blazer and polished brown Oxfords. Thurston Rayner walked in slowly but upright, holding a worn leather folder and wearing his bronze star pinned over his heart. The medal glinted under the ceiling lights as he moved toward the front, each step measured. He had the quiet presence of someone who'd spent years in places where silence could mean survival. In courtroom 6B, the chatter died down as he passed. A few people squinted at the ribbon on his chest, recognizing it. Most didn't know the man's name, but something about him made folks straighten in their seats. Then came the voice, sharp, clear, almost rehearsed. "Mr. Rayner," said Judge Celeste Grantham, adjusting her glasses without looking up. "Before we begin, remove the medal or face a contempt fine. This is a courtroom, not a parade." The room seemed to pause. Thurston didn't say a word. He glanced down at the medal once, then looked back at the bench. "I'm not here to put on a show, Your Honor," he said evenly. "This medal's part of who I am. I wear it the way I wear my name." Grantham leaned back. She was in her early 60s, known for her strict adherence to decorum and no-nonsense courtroom presence. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "Personal items, insignias, or symbols are prohibited unless approved by the court. You're fined $200. Let's proceed." There were murmurs from the pews. A middle-aged woman in a blue denim jacket whispered, "That ain't right," to no one in particular. Thurston didn't argue. He didn't sigh. He calmly opened his folder, eyes scanning the pages. When the judge asked if he had legal counsel, he looked up. "No, ma'am. I'll be representing myself." You could feel it. The shift. Small but real. The opposing side's lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit who introduced himself earlier as Wesley Brandt, smirked faintly and whispered something to his paralegal. Probably expected an easy win. Judge Grantham raised her brows. "You're choosing to proceed without an attorney in a civil property dispute involving over $40,000 in value?" "Yes, ma'am." She blinked once. "Very well," she said. "Let's begin." The plaintiff, a property developer named Dean Melling, stood flanked by two assistants. He was younger than Thurston by at least 30 years and dressed like a man used to pushing boundaries and getting away with it. Melling's team had filed a petition to seize a 6-foot-wide strip of land behind Thurston's modest home, land Thurston had planted with peach trees nearly 2 decades earlier. Melling claimed it belonged to him based on a new survey. Wesley Brandt walked to the front with confidence. "We'll be showing today that Mr. Rayner's trees stand on our client's property and must be removed immediately." Thurston looked over his glasses, then back at his folder. "I'd like to request that I be allowed to present evidence immediately following Mr. Brandt's opening." Judge Grantham was already annoyed. "We'll follow order. You'll have your chance." Thurston nodded once. "Understood." But there was something in his tone. Not sarcastic, not passive, just certain. Brandt began, using technical jargon. GPS coordinates, landmarkers, statute codes. He had exhibits, diagrams, even drone photos. It looked airtight. He ended by saying, "We believe this is a simple case of encroachment, Your Honor." Judge Grantham looked at Thurston. "Your response?" Thurston stood, calm, steady, holding nothing but 3 sheets of paper. "Your Honor, before I get into boundary law, I'd like to ask the court to review the petition's chain of title, particularly between 1992 and 2003. Something seems to be missing." Brandt rolled his eyes. Grantham didn't. "Explain," she said. Thurston held up the documents. 2 pages from the Tulsa County Recorder's Office. One shows the transfer of deed from the original developer to Mr. Melling's holding company. The other shows an easement established in 1998, granting me access to maintain that exact strip of land. He walked forward, handed them to the bailiff. The judge's brow furrowed. Brandt leaned into his table, whispering something fast to his assistant. But the room didn't breathe. Everyone watched the man with the medal. Judge Grantham read the easement document in silence. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she flipped the second page over, eyes scanning every line twice. She looked up slowly. "Mr. Brandt, were you aware of this easement?" Brandt stood, smoothed his tie, and replied with carefully measured arrogance. "Your Honor, the document appears to be authentic, but we question its relevance. Easements don't automatically grant ownership rights." Thurston didn't interrupt. He waited. The quiet between them felt charged. Then he stepped forward again. "May I clarify that point, Your Honor?" Grantham gave a small nod. "Go ahead." "Respectfully," Thurston began, "I'm not claiming ownership through the easement. I'm asserting that the strip of land in question has been in my continuous and undisputed care for over 20 years, and under Oklahoma's Adverse Possession Statute, Title 12, Section 93, that's enough to establish a valid claim of ownership, given that I've paid property tax and maintained the land as if it were mine." The courtroom didn't stir, but it leaned in. Brandt chuckled. Too loudly. "That's quite a legal interpretation for someone representing himself." Thurston turned his head. "Mr. Brandt, I spent 5 years in Vietnam, came back to a country that barely looked me in the eye, and earned my law degree while working nights and feeding 3 children. Don't mistake quiet for ignorance." Even the court reporter's fingers paused for a second. Judge Grantham didn't react, but something about her silence had changed. Brandt stammered, "Objection to the personal commentary, Your Honor." "Sustained," Grantham said softly. Then with more weight, "But noted." She turned to Thurston again. "You're citing adverse possession. Do you have tax documents, photographs, or affidavits to support your claim?" "I do." He opened a separate folder and handed 3 sets of documents to the bailiff. "Photographs dating back to 2002, signed statements from my neighbors, some of whom are here today, and 10 years' worth of tax records that include assessments covering that strip." It was overkill, and he knew it. Not in a flashy way, but in the way that told everyone in the room, "I came prepared for war, just not with bullets this time." Judge Grantham looked over the photos. Some showed younger versions of Thurston with a shovel in hand, standing beside tiny peach saplings. Others had kids, maybe grandkids, picking ripe fruit, their cheeks full. Brandt shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge looked at the crowd. "Is Mrs. Gentry present?" An older woman with a cane and floral scarf stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. You signed this affidavit?" "I did. Thurston's been tending those trees longer than that new building's been there. I remember when he planted them. We watched them grow together." "Thank you," Grantham said. She didn't smile, but the tone of her voice had softened, just a little. Brandt tried to regain ground. "Your Honor, the legal boundary supersedes sentiment. We're prepared to bring in a professional surveyor to clarify the parcel dimensions." Grantham looked unimpressed. "That won't be necessary yet." Then she turned back to Thurston. "Mr. Rayner, where did you study law?" There it was. Thurston adjusted his glasses. "I graduated from Winfield College of Law, Arkansas, class of 76. The school closed down in 92 after losing funding. But we produced some damn good attorneys before that happened." The room was quiet. Then a man in the back, another older black veteran by the look of his hat, clapped once. Just once, then lowered his hands to his lap again. Grantham didn't reprimand him. She looked down, then up. "Mr. Rayner, I have to admit, I didn't expect this." "I know," he said, not with smugness, but as a statement of fact. But what came next would shift the entire tone of the hearing in a way no one expected. Judge Grantham leaned back in her chair for the first time that morning. She didn't cross her arms, didn't reach for her gavel. She just stared at the man standing before her. This 81-year-old veteran who'd somehow turned a routine property case into something no one in the room could look away from. "Mr. Rayner," she said, her voice even. "Please proceed with your argument." Thurston gave a small nod and moved to the side of the courtroom, laying out 3 hand-drawn maps on the presentation board beside the clerk's table. The drawings weren't fancy. They were marked with Sharpie and annotated in pencil. But they were precise. "This first one," he said, "is the original survey done in 1996. You'll see here," he pointed with a capped pen, "that the border in question cuts just short of the rear drainage ditch, which lines up exactly with the base of the peach trees." Brandt squinted, stepping closer. "This isn't an official document?" "No, it isn't," Thurston replied. "It's drawn from my own records and notes taken during community meetings when that property was being developed. I was on the neighborhood zoning board until 2001. But this second one," he flipped to the next sheet, "is an official survey, recorded with the county in 2005, and this is where it gets strange." Grantham narrowed her eyes. "Go on," Thurston continued, tapping the corner of the map. "The boundary line moves 6 feet east in this version, taking in the land I've been maintaining for years. But there's no corresponding amendment in the county filings. No notification was ever sent to me or my neighbors. No hearing. Just shifted." Brandt cut in. "Your Honor, this is speculative." "No, it's procedural," Thurston interrupted. "And I'd like to submit a request for judicial review of this boundary change, given the absence of required public notice." Grantham paused. "Mr. Brandt?" Brandt hesitated. His face said it all. "I'll need to consult with our records team." "You do that," she said coolly. "In the meantime, I'll accept Mr. Rayner's request. The court will perform an internal review of the zoning adjustments made in 2005. The gallery was quiet, save for a single cough near the back. Then someone whispered, "Damn!" Brandt turned to Dean Melling, the developer, whose expression had gone from confident to stiff. He leaned forward, whispered something in Brandt's ear. The attorney nodded, scribbled on a legal pad, and stood again. "We ask for a continuance, Your Honor." "No," Thurston said plainly. "This case has been on the docket for 6 months. You've had time. You brought in a drone. You tried to bulldoze trees I planted when your client was still in middle school. No more delays." Grantham studied him. She didn't speak right away. "Mr. Brandt," she finally said, "if your client took action to remove or alter that land without a final ruling, this court reserves the right to impose penalties. Was anything done to the trees?" Brandt shifted again. "A few limbs may have been trimmed in preparation for site testing, but I have photos," Thurston cut in, holding up another sheet. "Taken last week. 3 trees were cut down at the base. You can see the stumps." Grantham sighed. "Not the tired kind, the annoyed kind. Bring those photos forward." He did. She studied them, then looked at Melling. "Sir, were you or your employees involved in the removal of these trees?" Melling tried to smile. "My team was following instructions from the project manager, who's currently on leave. I wasn't aware of the exact actions taken." She looked down, then back up. "Don't insult this court." Melling's smirk faded. "Understood." Thurston stepped back to the table. He hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't even looked angry, just steady. That's what made it hit harder. The quiet was louder than any shouting could have been. The judge rested her elbows on the bench, fingers steepled under her chin. "You're telling me these trees were part of your property maintenance for over 20 years, that you paid taxes, that you have neighbor affidavits, that an unauthorized boundary shift occurred, and now 3 of your trees have been destroyed?" "Yes, ma'am." Grantham turned to the clerk. "We'll be reviewing all property documents from 1996 onward. Contact the county registrar's office. In the meantime, this court is placing a temporary injunction on any construction activity on Mr. Melling's parcel." That landed like a hammer. Melling threw up his hands. "This is absurd." "No," she said sharply. "What's absurd is removing part of someone's land during a pending hearing. One more outburst and you're out." Melling sat down hard. Thurston stayed silent. But the tension in the room hadn't even reached its peak. Not yet. By the time the lunch recess was announced, no one moved. Judge Grantham stood, the clerk banged the gavel, and people just lingered. It was like no one wanted to break the spell. Courtrooms didn't usually feel like this, like something bigger was happening. Thurston gathered his papers slowly, methodically. A woman in the 3rd row leaned over to another and whispered, "He's not just some old man. Did you see how he handled those maps?" Near the back, a young black man named Isaiah Winslow a law student observing court that day, stood frozen in place. He stared at Thurston like he'd just witnessed a masterclass. Isaiah's own father had served in Iraq, but never talked much about the military, let alone the law. Watching Thurston command the room with barely a raised voice made something tighten in his chest. As Thurston walked toward the hallway, the courtroom buzzed again. This time, not with doubt, but with curiosity. Outside, Judge Grantham didn't return to her chambers right away. Instead, she asked the bailiff to hold everyone for 5 minutes and stepped into the hallway. She didn't say anything immediately, just stood there watching Thurston flip through a worn blue folder. He noticed her, but didn't speak first. "Where did you say you practiced law, Mr. Rayner?" she asked, arms lightly crossed. "Mostly in Veterans Affairs," he replied. "I worked as a legal advisor in Kansas City for about 12 years. Represented veterans in discharge upgrade cases, housing appeals, medical access, and a lot of claims that got buried in the system." "You never went private?" "I had offers, but I figured helping the people no one wanted to listen to was more my speed." Grantham glanced down the hallway, where Brandt and Melling were arguing in hushed tones. "You've done your homework," she said carefully. Thurston gave a polite half-smile. "I always do." There was a short silence. Then she asked, "Why didn't you mention your legal background when the fine was issued?" He tucked the folder under his arm. "Didn't think I needed to. The medal shouldn't have been a problem in the first place." She nodded once. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't dismissal either. "I'll see you after recess," she said. He tipped his head gently, then made his way outside. Back in the courtroom, Isaiah couldn't sit still. He turned to his classmate, whispering fast. "I looked him up. He's not just a legal advisor. He used to lecture. Guest speaker at 2 law schools. Wrote a paper on due process in veteran cases that won a state bar award." "No way," his classmate said. "Way. Dude's a legend and nobody's been talking about him." But that was the thing. Thurston had never asked to be talked about. While Brandt came from a firm that sent out press releases after every verdict, Thurston had worked his whole life in offices with fluorescent lights and battered desks, walking clients through paperwork they barely understood. Back at the plaintiff's table, Wesley Brandt looked agitated. He flipped through his binder like the answer was buried somewhere between the pages. Melling was red-faced and pacing. "Can we counterclaim?" Melling hissed. "For what?" Brandt shot back. "He has tax receipts, documents, neighbors, and the judge leaning in his direction." "Then discredit him. Find something." Brandt closed his binder. "You think I'm not trying?" They both froze when Thurston walked back in. Court resumed at 1 Oak sharp. Grantham returned with a stack of documents handed to her by the clerk, and she adjusted her chair like she'd settled into a new mindset. "All right," she began. "We've received preliminary confirmation from the Tulsa County Recorder's Office that there is no registered amendment to the property boundary line from the original 1996 filing to the 2005 survey used in the plaintiff's submission. That is, at best, an administrative oversight. At worst, it's misrepresentation." Brandt stood. "Your Honor, we request time to conduct a deeper review." "No," she interrupted. "You've had time. We are proceeding." She looked at Thurston. "You may continue." He didn't use the podium this time. He stepped slightly forward, speaking plainly. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit my closing argument now. The documentation has been provided. The legal basis has been cited. My final point is simple. The law isn't just about lines on a map. It's about responsibility. I maintained that land. I paid those taxes. I followed the process. What they're doing isn't about land. It's about taking without consequence." You could hear a pin drop. But what happened next? When Thurston questioned the ethics of Melling's permit and the sudden zoning change, would shift the courtroom into deeper waters. Thurston adjusted his collar, eyes steady on the judge. His voice didn't rise. It never needed to. "I'm submitting a written motion for discovery into how Mr. Melling's zoning permit was approved despite the missing boundary amendment. The signature on the 2005 survey file doesn't match the registrar's records from that year. I had it reviewed by a handwriting analyst 2 weeks ago." He handed a slim document to the bailiff. Judge Grantham's expression darkened, not with anger, but with calculation. She flipped through the pages slowly, stopping near the middle. Her eyes narrowed. The county official listed here, Deborah S. Knorr. She left the office in 2004. This document was filed in January 2005. Grantham looked up. You're alleging forgery? Thurston didn't flinch. I'm alleging it deserves scrutiny. I'm not accusing anyone without proof. But I've worked in enough bureaucracies to know what it looks like when someone rubber stamps what they shouldn't. Brant stood. Objection. This is hearsay and speculative. Grantham didn't even look at him. It's a request for discovery, not a ruling. Overruled. A buzz of movement passed through the gallery. Grantham's tone had shifted. Less irritated, more precise. She was listening now, not just hearing. Thurston turned to the audience. I wasn't going to bring that up today, but since my peach trees are now stumps, and I've been fined for wearing the only medal I ever got for doing something right, I figured it was worth putting on the record. The silence hit hard. Even Brant sat down slowly. Then, out of nowhere, the door opened quietly, and a small voice said, Grandpa? Everyone turned. A girl, 12, maybe 13, stood at the back of the courtroom, flanked by a middle-aged woman in jeans and a cardigan. Sorry, Your Honor, the woman said quickly. We tried to wait, but she wanted to see him. Thurston's face softened as he motioned gently. Come here, baby. The girl jogged down the aisle, hugged him tight around the waist. Did they take the trees? His hand settled on her back. Some of them. But they'll grow back. Just takes time and patience. The judge didn't interrupt. She watched. Thurston looked up again. That girl helped plant those with me. That's her history, too. The judge blinked slowly, then cleared her throat. Let the record show that Mr. Rayner has raised a serious concern regarding procedural fraud. This court will submit the survey to a forensic analyst within 5 business days. Any further construction on Mr. Melling's site remains frozen. Brant whispered furiously to Melling, who looked like he wanted to speak, but thought better of it. Then Grantham did something no one expected. Mr. Rayner, she said slowly, can you tell me what brought you to law in the first place? Thurston looked at her for a long beat. You really want to know? Yes, she said. He looked around the courtroom, as if trying to find the right place to start. I came back from Vietnam with shrapnel in my shoulder and a DD-214 full of holes. My benefits were denied. Said I had insufficient documentation. I didn't even have the money for a lawyer. So I went to the public library and sat there, day after day, reading the code books, taking notes by hand. Took me 4 years, but I won my appeal. He shifted his weight slightly. That win changed my life. But what really stuck with me? The line of other vets outside the VA office, guys sleeping in their cars, women getting turned away with babies in strollers. I figured if I could help them, maybe I'd sleep better at night. Grantham nodded once. That's what justice looks like, Mr. Rayner. Not every lawyer remembers that. He didn't smile. But something in his posture eased. I never forgot. Then the door to the courtroom opened again. This time it was a local reporter, notebook in hand. She didn't interrupt, just stood quietly in the back, listening. But what no one in the room realized was that someone else had been watching this case from afar, and their entrance would change everything. The afternoon sun had shifted, sending narrow beams of light across the wooden floor of courtroom 6B. It had been hours since the case began, but no one asked for a break. No one looked at the clock. The usual tension that settles into a courtroom after long proceedings wasn't there. People leaned forward. They wanted to hear what came next. Judge Grantham reviewed the last of the documents from Thurston's folder. The mood had changed. Her expression no longer carried the detachment of authority, but the intensity of someone trying to catch up. Mr. Rayner, she said carefully, you've raised the issue of a forged signature on the 2005 survey. I'll issue a formal review. In the meantime, you mentioned earlier that the developer's permits may be faulty as well. Thurston nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I did. He walked slowly toward the exhibit table and placed a packet of papers next to the court clerk. I made an open records request from the city 2 months ago. I wanted to see all applications Mr. Melling's company filed for that development project. Specifically, I was looking for the variance that would allow him to build within 5 feet of an existing residential lot. That variance was never granted. Not in 2019. Not in 2020. Not now. Judge Grantham arched her brow. Are you certain? Only 3 were ever issued for that block in the last decade, he said. None of them were for that lot. Which means his permits don't authorize construction on that stretch, and if they were pushed through anyway, someone's office is going to be in a lot of trouble. Brandt stood up so fast he knocked his chair back. Your Honor, I move to strike these documents. This is outside the scope of the current hearing. Grantham raised a hand, silencing him. I've heard enough to warrant deeper inquiry. Mr. Rayner, thank you. She looked back down at the documents, fanning through the pages one by one. It appears Mr. Melling's construction permits list an outdated parcel number. The permit office should have caught that. I'm flagging it for municipal review. Brandt leaned toward Melling, who was now visibly sweating. What do we do? Melling muttered, You're the lawyer. Fix it. Brandt swallowed hard, stood again. Your Honor, at this point, we request to settle. Thurston looked over at them. Now you want to settle? Brandt hesitated. In good faith, I gave you 6 months to settle before you touched a single tree, Thurston replied. You bulldozed them anyway. Melling jumped in, voice cracking slightly. Mr. Rayner, I didn't know. My project manager took liberties. You paid for liberties. Thurston shot back. That land fed my grandkids. That land was the only thing left I could still work with these old hands. You thought it was just dirt because an old man owned it. Melling's eyes dropped to the table. Grantham looked between the parties. Mr. Rayner, are you seeking damages? He paused, thought about it. I'm not trying to bankrupt anyone, he said. I just want them to pay for what they destroyed and leave the land alone. No settlement, just restoration. She nodded. Understood. Then the door opened again, quietly. A woman in a grey blazer walked in, carrying a city government badge. She handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. Your Honor, the bailiff said. This just arrived from the Tulsa Zoning Review Office, marked urgent. Grantham opened it. Read it again. She looked up, eyes hardening. The city has confirmed the parcel number listed on Mr. Melling's permits was retired in 2010. These permits are invalid. A wave of whispers rolled through the gallery. Someone let out a low whistle. Thurston didn't flinch. He simply leaned on the table with both hands, breathing through his nose like a man whose work was nearly done. Grantham turned to Melling. You'll cease all construction immediately. You'll pay for the destruction of the trees and any legal fees related to this hearing. And if further investigation finds that documents were altered to obtain those permits, you could be facing criminal charges. Melling looked stunned. Brandt sat down hard, saying nothing. The judge turned to Thurston. Anything else you'd like to add? Yes, he said. I want the court to acknowledge, in writing, that I have full legal possession of that strip. And I want it filed today. She tapped her gavel once. So ordered. But before the judge could dismiss the hearing, someone unexpected raised their hand from the gallery, and it shifted the room all over again. The hand that rose from the second row belonged to Isaiah Winslow, the law student who'd been watching every moment like his future depended on it. He stood, nervous but clear-eyed. Your Honor, may I say something? Judge Grantham looked surprised. She hesitated, then nodded. Identify yourself for the record. Isaiah Winslow, second-year law student at Tulsa College of Law. I'm here as part of my courtroom observation program. She nodded again. Proceed. Isaiah swallowed, glanced at Thurston, then faced the bench. I just want to thank this court for allowing what happened today. Because I've sat through hearings where people like Mr. Rayner, people who look like me, get steamrolled. I've seen it more than once. But today, this man taught more law in a few hours than some of my professors have in a semester. A quiet murmur passed through the room. Grantham didn't silence it. Isaiah continued. He showed me that law isn't just about knowing the rules. It's about standing your ground when people pretend you don't have any. He sat down before he lost his nerve. Thurston looked at him and gave a small nod, just enough for Isaiah to know it mattered. Judge Grantham exhaled, almost like she'd been holding her breath. Thank you, Mr. Winslow, she said. Your comments are noted. Then she turned to the courtroom and did something no one expected. She leaned forward. "When I saw Mr. Rayner walk in today, I admit, I saw a man wearing a military medal in my courtroom, and I reacted with authority instead of judgment. That was a mistake. I was focused on protocol, not principle." The room fell silent, not tense, just still. Grantham wasn't known for being introspective. Most people said she ruled with a cold hand and an iron gavel, but in that moment, her tone cracked just enough for people to see the person behind the robe. She looked at Thurston. "Mr. Rayner, I rescind the contempt fine. I apologize for issuing it in the first place." Thurston nodded, his eyes steady. "Thank you, Your Honor." She wasn't finished. "And I'd like to say on the record that the presence of your medal, worn with pride and dignity, didn't disturb the court. It reminded it what service and discipline look like." There was no applause. Not yet. Just a courtroom full of people trying to absorb something rare, a public figure admitting fault without being forced to. She cleared her throat and continued. "Now, this court recognizes your claim to the land, and the injunction on Mr. Melling's construction is upheld until further review from the zoning board. A formal restitution hearing will be scheduled within 30 days. Brandt looked defeated. Melling stared into his folded hands. Thurston remained still, his posture unchanged. But anyone looking closely could see it in his shoulders. Something had lifted. Not completely. Just enough. Judge Grantham stood. "Court is adjourned." The gavel tapped once. People stood, but no one left right away. Isaiah walked toward Thurston, notebook clutched in his hand. "Mr. Rayner, sir, if you ever want to teach again, even just once, I know students who'd line up for it." Thurston smiled faintly. "Son, at my age, standing too long is the real challenge. But I appreciate the offer." A few people came up to shake his hand. Even a city zoning official stopped to thank him for raising red flags they'd missed. Grantham gathered her papers slowly, then looked across the room one last time. She walked toward the gallery, stopping near where Thurston stood. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" He looked at her, then nodded. "Of course." They stepped outside the courtroom, away from the crowd, into a quiet side hallway. "I wasn't always like that," she said. "Rigid. Cold. But somewhere along the way, the robe made me forget what it was like to listen before acting." Thurston didn't scold. He didn't gloat. "I've been in courtrooms where judges tore me down for breathing too loud," he said. "Today, you let the truth speak. That's more than most." She nodded slowly. "I hope we crossed paths for a reason." "You did," he said. "To remember." But the day wasn't done. Not for Thurston. Not for anyone watching. And what happened when he stepped outside the courthouse doors would ripple further than he ever expected. The heavy doors of the courthouse swung open, and Thurston stepped outside into the fading Tulsa light. The sun had dropped just enough to cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. He paused, eyes adjusting, body calm. Then he heard it. A slow, steady clap. Then another. Within seconds, a small crowd that had gathered outside. Neighbors, veterans, city workers, and even a few strangers began to applaud, not wildly, not the kind of cheer you hear at a football game, but a grounded, meaningful rhythm, the kind that says, "We saw what you did," and it mattered. Thurston's granddaughter, the same girl who'd hugged him earlier, rushed over with her mother close behind. "Grandpa, did you win?" He looked down at her, then up at the people gathering. "I didn't win, baby. I held my ground." His voice was soft, but those nearest heard it, and somehow it felt like the truest answer. The woman beside him, his daughter, gripped his arm. "You didn't just hold your ground, Daddy. You reminded people that some things still matter. Truth, pride, history." Reporters started moving in closer, holding up microphones and phones. Someone asked for a quote. Someone else shouted, "Mr. Rayner, how does it feel to be vindicated?" He raised a hand. Not to wave, but to settle the air. "I'm not here to be a headline," he said. "I'm here because I was tired of being ignored. I've seen enough men buried without ever getting to say their piece." And with that, he turned away from the cameras. He didn't need the spotlight. Behind him, Judge Grantham emerged through the side door. She stopped a few steps back, watching quietly. Her staff had urged her to avoid reporters, but she stayed. She needed to see it with her own eyes, the way people looked at Thurston not with pity, but with respect. Isaiah Winslow approached cautiously. He stood just outside the circle, notebook in hand, hesitant to interrupt. Thurston noticed. "You got something you want to say?" he asked, still smiling slightly. Isaiah stepped forward. "I was thinking about something you said, about reading code books at the library. Do you still have those notes?" Thurston chuckled. "Stacked in boxes somewhere. My handwriting wasn't made for public viewing." "I'd like to scan them," Isaiah said. "Make them digital, so people can learn from you. Real students, law students, even kids in public schools. What you did today is history." Thurston studied him for a second. "You think people care about handwritten notes from some dusty old man?" "I do," Isaiah said. "And after today, a lot more will." Before Thurston could answer, a man in a suit pushed his way through the crowd. He looked flustered, holding a business card in one hand. "Mr. Rayner, I'm with the Tulsa Veterans Legacy Fund. We saw the live feed inside the courtroom. If you'd ever be willing to speak at one of our gatherings, or even advise us, we'd be honored." Thurston raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want someone who just embarrassed half the city zoning board?" The man laughed. "Exactly the kind of voice we need." Thurston glanced at his daughter, who gave a tiny nod. "I'll think about it," he said. "But I'm not putting on a suit. You don't need to." From the edge of the crowd, an older man in a navy hat called out, "You still got those peach tree cuttings, Thurston?" Thurston smiled, this time for real. "You bet I do. You want one?" "Hell yes," the man replied. "I'll plant it next to my porch. You've already planted enough lessons for the whole city." Laughter rippled through the crowd, light but genuine. Someone yelled, "Semper Fi!" and another waved a small American flag. It wasn't a parade. It didn't need to be. Thurston took a step down the stairs. Then another. The cameras didn't follow. The press didn't push. No one asked for another quote. Sometimes victory doesn't look like headlines or big speeches. Sometimes it looks like a quiet walk home after doing what needed to be done. But as Thurston made his way to the sidewalk, he had no idea that his story would be on the front page the next morning, and that people across the country would soon be saying his name. The next morning, the article ran in the Tulsa Tribune. Front page, top fold, black and white photo of Thurston Rayner standing on the courthouse steps, his bronze star glinting beneath the headline, "Veterans Land Battle Ends with Apology and Justice." But while the city buzzed with talk shows and social media clips dissecting the hearing, Thurston sat quietly on his back porch, sipping coffee and watching a bird peck at the grass. He wasn't scrolling. He wasn't listening to the news. He was waiting. At 9:12 a.m., a car pulled into his driveway. Judge Celeste Grantham stepped out. No robe, no courtroom. Just a plain navy blazer, slacks, and a folder in her hand. He met her halfway. "Didn't expect a house call," he said. "I figured this was better than an email," she replied. He gestured to a chair beside his. "Hope you drink coffee." "I do," she said, settling in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze moved through the maple trees behind his fence. Then she opened the folder and pulled out a printed letter. "I wanted you to have a copy of the court's formal statement. The land is officially yours. The fine is erased. The documents are sealed and recorded." Thurston took the paper, folded it carefully, and slid it into his pocket without reading it. "Appreciate it." She looked at him. "That case reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That justice isn't sterile. It's not just codes and language and rules. It's human." He nodded slowly. "Most folks forget that." "I didn't just forget it," she said. "I ran from it for years." Thurston turned slightly toward her. "Why?" Grantham stared out across the yard. "I spent most of my early career trying to be respected in rooms full of people who didn't think I belonged. So I learned to be tough, uncompromising. I followed the book to the letter because I thought that would keep them from questioning me. And did it? Sometimes," she admitted. "But I lost something along the way." He nodded again. "Empathy?" "Yeah," she said. "And something else. The ability to be wrong." They sat in silence for a while. She watched the bird in the yard, too. "You ever think of retiring?" he asked. Some days, she said. But after yesterday, I think I've got more work to do, he chuckled. You and me both. Then she turned to him more directly. I also wanted to ask you something that isn't on the record. He raised an eyebrow. All right. Would you consider sitting on a new community legal review board? We're building it next year, city funded. You wouldn't have to do much. Just weigh in on questionable zoning cases and property disputes. You sure they want someone who can't even see straight without these old glasses? They want someone who knows what justice looks like when it's been ignored. Thurston scratched his chin. You already got my mornings tied up with these peach trees, you know. You could bring a basket to every meeting, she smiled. He smiled back. That's how you bribe the board, huh? No, she said. That's how we rebuild trust. He nodded, thought about it, then finally said, Yeah, I'll do it. She stood, brushed off her pants, and offered her hand. He shook it without hesitation. I'm glad we met the way we did, she said. Funny, he said. So am I. She walked back to her car, turned once before opening the door. And Mr. Rayner? Yeah? You're still not allowed to wear the medal in court. He blinked, surprised. Then she grinned. But next time, I'll wear mine too. She drove off before he could reply. But he didn't need to. He sat back down in his chair and took another sip of coffee, his granddaughter's voice echoing in his head from the day before. Did they take the trees? No, baby, they didn't. And now, they never will. But as peaceful as that morning was, the calls that started coming later that day from across the country made it clear. This story wasn't just about one man's land. It was about something far bigger. By Monday, Thurston Rayner's name had crossed state lines. It started with the local coverage. Then a clip from the hearing made it onto a national morning show. By Tuesday, veterans groups from California to Maine were calling the Tulsa courthouse asking for a transcript. One clip in particular, Thurston saying, I didn't win. I held my ground, was reposted over 1 million times in 3 days. But Thurston stayed quiet. He wasn't online. He didn't want interviews. His daughter answered the calls, turning down podcasts, turning away cameras parked across the street. Still, the attention grew. Letters started arriving, hundreds by the end of the week. Handwritten notes, emails printed and mailed, old photos, newspaper clippings from other court battles where the outcome hadn't been so fair. Some people sent peach seeds, others sent medals they'd kept in drawers for decades. A few just sent words. You reminded me who I used to be. They cut down your trees, but not your roots. Thank you for holding your ground so we could find ours. One letter stood out. It was from a 17-year-old girl in Birmingham who had watched the case with her grandfather. You made me want to study law. Before that, I thought the courtroom wasn't a place for people like us. I see it differently now. You made it feel real. Thurston sat at the kitchen table reading it twice, then 3 times. Then he tucked it into the inside pocket of his blazer, where the medal usually stayed. He still tended the peach trees. 3 new saplings had already been planted in the exact spot where the old ones had been cut down. His granddaughter helped him water them every other day. The soil was soft now, and the roots were taking. One morning, Isaiah Winslow came by with a tablet under his arm. I started the archive, he said. Scanned your notes, added the court audio. People are already using it in classrooms. Thurston looked at the screen and shook his head slowly. Never thought I'd end up in somebody's syllabus. You didn't just make a legal case, Isaiah said. You gave people permission to be heard. The two sat on the porch for a while. Isaiah asked about old cases Thurston had worked on. Stories came easily now, about veterans denied housing because of clerical errors, about widows who'd been told their husbands' records were lost, about the nights he spent writing appeals by hand because no printer worked and the budget didn't cover repairs. Isaiah recorded some of it, with permission. The plan was to create a small digital exhibit, voices that weren't heard until they spoke. Thurston said, call it something shorter. Like what? He thought a second, then said, Roots. The city council voted unanimously to name the zoning review board after him. The Thurston Rayner Community Equity Panel. He didn't attend the ceremony, but he sent a letter. It read, Justice is not a favor, it's a responsibility. I'm honored. But I don't want statues or plaques. Just make sure the next time a quiet man walks into a courtroom with truth in his pocket, you don't ask him to take it off before speaking. Weeks passed, and still the story echoed. Other cases surfaced. Other communities took a closer look at how land changed hands without notice. People questioned policies that had been rubber-stamped for decades. But through all of it, Thurston remained the same. Every Friday, he brought a basket of fresh peaches to the local shelter. When asked why, he simply said, "Those trees owe me nothing, but I still owe plenty." And that was how he lived. Quiet, clear, unshaken. If you ever walk through the East Tulsa Community Garden on a late afternoon, you might see a plaque near the back. It's small, doesn't stand out. It just says, "He held his ground so others could grow." That's not just Thurston Rayner's story. That's a reminder. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do isn't fight back with noise, but stand firm with truth. If this story meant something to you, share it, speak it, teach it. Let people know that courage doesn't always look like a battle. Sometimes it looks like an old man with a folder and a tree. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what justice should feel like. Human.